Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing today? My name is Jamal. I'm the CEO and co founder of Tena. And I just wanted to say and introduce you guys to our new IGTV live, where we wanted to talk a little bit more about health and health disparities and kind of have a conversation with our audience and bring in professionals. And today we got Dr. Milton to talk a little bit about minority mental health. So, Dr. Milton, I'm gonna let you in soon. Are you with us? All right, Dr. Milton. Let's see. Trying to figure out how to add people. All right, let's give it a moment. Hi, Dr. Milton.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you?
Okay, I'm doing well. A lot of just adjusting my camera.
Yeah, of course.
There we go. Okay, yeah, so we can go
Perfect.
ahead and get this on. It's on the road there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
Okay, good.
perfectly. Yeah, hopefully you can hear me as well.
I can hear you. Well, thank you
Oh,
for
great.
joining us. We're really excited to have you today and to talk a little bit about minority mental health. Um, for the audience who don't know you, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, great. Hey, thank you, Jamal. Thank you. Hey, greetings, everyone. Hey, my name is Dr. Abram Milton, and I'm a staff counselor currently working at Cal State Northridge within that university counseling services. So I basically, bottom line, I provide mental health support for the different students on that CSUN campus.
Wow, that's great to hear. It's nice that CSUN has that service for students, and I know how stressful it could be. Me by myself, I'm a pharmacy student currently, and stress is one of the things we deal with. What made you get into working in mental health? I'm just curious
Uh,
about you. What
oh yeah,
made you interested to go into it?
uh,
Because it's rare to, for me at least, like I never met like another male that works in this field, especially from
uh-huh.
people of African descent. So can you talk a little bit about what motivated you to get into this
Uh,
work?
Oh yes, thank you. Definitely. Well, my story definitely is different and about how what led me into the mental health field. Before coming into the mental health field, I served as an active duty Marine. Within the Marine Corps for over like 20 plus years, actually like 23 years. And within kind of halfway within my career, I had started noticing, especially with a lot that was going on during that time. We were on the tail end of the original Gulf War that had occurred and about some of those different deployments, and started noticing things in relation to like post-traumatic stress within some of my fellow Marines and some of the service members. And not only with some of that stuff with them dealing with trauma,
Yeah.
and things like that. But also, we're talking about just that military lifestyle in itself, right? The different anxieties, the
Mm-hmm.
different depression that may come up, trauma, family dynamics, and things that went on. But more specifically, I was really interested in trauma. And during this time, this was on the early kind of onsets of when they would start looking at trauma within female population. So for me, I was definitely interested. So I know in some of my earlier work, I was doing research trying to look into about post-traumatic stress onset between, males and females back during that time when we was talking about binary
Yeah.
and what have you. But from that, I just found out I had that passion, and then I continued on into getting this. Through the latter parts of my career, that's when I really started noticing about for myself in relation about mental health and about men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we see about men of color.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, me being a black male, person of African descent and stuff like that, noticing about some of the disparities about I know that from my culture, you can hear from me that I'm from the South, right? That accent. So knowing about some of these things I didn't even hear about when I was younger. So then I started wondering about some others, other black males or just males in general, because these are things that we don't normally talk about, right? So a lot of times, I know when I was originally, I was working at a university on the East Coast,
Mm.
and then really seeing about some of the current or even like the social politicals and what have you, just seeing that there was a need out there about, for another male to be able to talk and just wanted to be that representation. So a lot of this stuff, like we're saying, initially started off with those components about veterans and things like that. It translated to like about identity, about male identity, and then things about kind of men and people of color and stuff like that about representation.
Yeah, and I think you hit on point about talking about me mental health in regards to men. I know, like for myself, growing up, that was not something we talked about.
Right,
It's
right.
always talked about as, mental health is something more in the female gender that talks about like
Hmm.
your feelings and how you feel. And as a man, those words that you hear a lot, it's like, oh, you're soft, or you
Right,
get
right,
over it. You're not supposed to have these emotions. So
right.
you
Well, you
want to
seen
talk?
that, yeah, yeah, yeah. You
Yeah.
seen that, like, right, when you're talking about the emotions, right? We're saying they no, and sometimes on some of these things, what you would notice is that um, sometimes these things were verbalized,
Yeah.
not to say, but then sometimes it was not being said too, right? And within those family dynamics, and we don't even notice that especially sometimes with my male clients when I'm talking with them, or just any clients in general, we saying I always ask them about how within their family dynamics what was said, and then some things that was not said but was kind of implied about
Mm.
what we do and what we don't do as far as expressing emotion.
Exactly. Especially the whole idea of, you have to be the macho man. You're the
Right.
protector of the house and the provider. And you always have that feeling of, if I do show that, you can't really, they won't look at me for that
Hmm.
role anymore. Especially like, I think in different cultures, that has aspect to that. What's your
Yeah.
experience dealing with different students, you interact with that come from different, ethnic groups or different cultures and stuff like that? How do you go by like even having this conversation, especially with the
No.
men?
Well, yes. You bring up such a good point, or a good topic when we are talking about in relation to um, men or different men of color that comes into my office, right? Because with any student making that first conversation and walking into our office, it's so hard for them.
Yeah.
It's so hard for any student to come in and to come. So you can only imagine with sometimes with some of these males, with some of these men of color, about especially our office is on like one of those top floors, and for them to take that elevator, they come up there when they knowing they need help. So a lot of times when they initially come in, I like to talk about what we like to say that the elephant in the room, about acknowledging, hey, what does it feel? How does it feel for two males to be in the room now having this conversation? When if a male is in my office and they may be crying and shedding tears or getting very interpersonal or things like that, to ask them, how do, how does this feel like kind of to be saying this right now? Because sometimes they don't even think about it, right? Some of them even have hesitations. And I kind of help them kind of explore about, there are no judgments here and things like that, right? Because this may be the one place where you can be truly yourself, right?
Yeah.
And to really think about that when I go outside this door, I may have to put on this mask about being macho and all this other stuff. But working here, I can be my true self, right? And I think that's what we all looking for, that identity.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's already hard in this world to have the identity beside, just with all the things you're exposed to and all the things you hear, and as a man, like physical it's health and mental health is one of the huge parts in taking care of ourselves. And I'm glad that you're able to talk to the students like that. Is there any like stories you could share with us? Like what's the common thing that really occurs when a man comes in? What are the things that they always say to you and you notice
Yeah.
the pattern?
Well, I think with a lot of the different men and stuff like that, I think a lot of times what we see on some of these things is, as you mentioned before, some common themes that comes up, especially within university. I mean, not different places I've been at had different things. I used to work in addiction, and there were talks, but sometimes you see this thing about expectations. I can remember a client that I had one time, and when I was working at an addiction clinic, and how as he was transitioning from, because he had been clean off of any kind of drug use, but the parents, particularly his father, was very critical, very judgmental of him and his actions. And it felt like no matter what he tried to do right, the father would kind of put him down, right? But then seeing through our work about his own insight about making change within his life, like I said, he had remained, abstinent from his drug use. He started exercising.
Wow.
He started looking for his own job. And I can remember that final day when he came in, sometimes we call termination of therapy, where we kind of end out. Well, as we were saying our final words, he looked at me and said, hey, Abram, I'm going to be okay. And it just kind of warmed my heart. I always remember that kind of case like that, where some people, because when people come in, right, initially we are trying to collaborate to help, but then, that ultimate goal of that therapy is about that self-sufficiency
Yeah.
and coming to that realization, right? So you have those things. And then for some individuals, like you say, in common themes that possibly come up within some of these sessions, especially is these things about, like we're talking about family dynamics, about, am I good enough? Am I going to be able to survive after school, college, and the university, or within their relationships? With maybe that things that come up with heartbreak, and then that comes about internalization, and we kind of explore those topics with that layer about how masculinity, or about how being a male, about how these expectations come on, right? And as you were saying that, I can remember a case many years ago. I was seeing a client, and they were, because sometimes with males, the machoism, sometimes people talk about promiscuity and about kind of sexual conquest and all this stuff, right? And this one client initially that came in talking about highlighting some of these things, right? But I said, no, let's go a little bit deeper. And let's really kind of explore that. Well, where are you getting this message from that we have to do all this kind of promiscuousness or what have you? After 3 or 4 sessions, he looked at me and said, Abram, you know what? To be honest with you, I may talk about all this, but I wasn't ready then
Yeah.
for all that kind of activity, right? But that kind of comes with some of these people about these expectations about what they thought society wanted, but then knowing about your identity, about what you want.
No, definitely. I think expectations play a big role, and that's like the rise of social media and the rise of, everything being so
Absolutely.
easily accessible. The role models that we have growing up as male is you see all
Hmm.
these expectations of what you're supposed to be, and I
Right.
and I and I definitely agree with that. If like you start doing things they're not ready for because everybody else is kind of doing it.
Right. And you see that like with social media, right? Because we know how with social media or entertainment and all that, it is a marketing thing, right?
Yeah.
So with many of these things is that they're going to put this image out, and we can get into all kinds of stuff about behavioralism. You see it, then you want to do it. So they want, the main thing is they want to sell the products. They want to get you to watch and all that. So they're going to put these things that you can associate with, right? And send these messages that may not even be verbalized. But if you see this person that you may be trying to emulate, or what they want telling you that they emulate, but then
Yeah.
you really look at it and say, should I really be emulating this person or individual, or should I be looking into myself? And I can just remember, but some people, I know we got a lot of young viewers here, is that I always tell people is that I started really coming into my own self about identifying and noticing when I was like 24. I was like in a good place within my military career, where I started saying, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is about my identity. Now with that, I also allow myself to change, because we can adapt. But at initial time, I say that sometimes we see that we get like at 23, 24, we start things start seeming like they kind of start solidifying
Yeah.
and making sense. But but it's an ongoing journey. I still check on myself even to this day, because things change.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. It's like, how do you go by, finding your identity? It's like there's so many things that are pulling you a different direction. It's what are the things
Right.
that you usually tell your clients that you see or you notice of how to guide them to find their identity?
Yes, and then you bring up a good point, because what I think about identity development or just exploring, since I'm working at a college setting now, some of the first questions when I gain a client, a client for an intake or what have you, is I ask them about, hey, why are you in college now?
Mm.
Right? What brought you to college? Many times, some of the students say initially, well, because my parents said to go, come,
Yeah.
right? That's
This
a
is very
common,
common.
that's a, right, right. It's quite common, right? And it's expected. And then I say, okay, now that we got that out the way, for freshmen, I may ask that question initially, but then some of them who've been there for a while, I say, okay, now that you've stayed in, what are your motivations and drive about why you are here?
Mm.
And then that's where we can kind of get into those things about motivations and drive or values. So there's within a lot of my sessions, I deal a lot of work about trying to identify what do clients value. Is it family? Is it isolation, or is it kind of things where they want to gain a family, or is it about some kind of social status, or is it about knowledge, about world peace, or whatever it is? Everybody's unique, and I'm not going to go tell them what they should. All I want them to do is when they're working with me, right, is to just understand yourself.
Mm.
That's all I'm really doing within those sessions, trying to help them understand themselves. Because yes, there's plenty of people outside. When we hang up this and we walk out, everybody can go out there and try to tell you about who you should be. You
Mm.
should be this. You should be doing that. But to really know, I hear you, but this is who I want to be,
Yeah.
and it's okay, whatever that may be, right? And I think that's the hardest thing sometimes with males, right? Because we have these things about these standards, or even people of color, right? When we talk about we're in different kind of societies, whereas we may not be, for some people who may be immigrants or kind of just recently come into America and all that, there's the expectations,
Mm.
what they've seen or what their family has told them. I got that, but then who are you?
Yeah.
What do you like? And whatever that is, it's okay.
Hmm.
And I think, and that, so when we're talking about that work, that's how a lot of those things come when I'm working with individuals.
Yeah. And then just a moment, I just want to tell the audience that if you guys have any questions, please submit them. At the end of this conversation, we'll like to read through them and ask the
Oh, yes.
questions.
I love questions out there. Feel free at any kind of point as we're going.
Yeah, thank you. Just to continue our conversation, I think you mentioned it. It's more that finding the identity. I feel like for me, it's more, you don't hear it often from the male side or even minority side of saying it's
Hmm.
okay to be that, you know?
Right, right.
It's you're always told like, no, this is not how you should be. And even when you find your identity, you kind of still in the dark because nobody else tells you like it's okay to be you.
Right.
And it's a
Right,
hard
right. But think
journey.
about that. Yeah, could you imagine that, Jamal? Like, if you was with someone and they just said, "Hey, whatever you want them to be, it's okay,"
Exactly.
right? And things like this. And we know that parental figures, family, and others, they have general ideas from their experience.
Mm.
But with each of us, we have our own journey,
Yeah.
right? And at the end of the day, we can only account for ourselves on many of those things. So sometimes I think within some of these circles, with some of the things when I try to work with men and stuff like that, especially men groups or what have you, it's just that acknowledgement of just saying, you know what, whatever you're trying to do within this, right, that it's okay. It is your journey.
Yeah.
It's your life and how you're going, right? And I think so many people kind of forget that about, like the concept I think you heard on my other Instagram live when I talk about that gatekeeper. That's another
Yeah.
topic later on for this topic, but just kind of saying about who am I?
Hmm.
And whatever that may be, it's okay.
It's okay. Definitely. I 100% agree. Just to shift the gears, uh,
Mhm.
what part of your background or experience helped you connect with different people from, different backgrounds? Because I know
Oh,
it's difficult to talk to somebody that you never met before about these topics, and they walk in
mhm,
your door. Like, what helped you get to know all these different cultures, all these different ethnicities, and the way
mhm.
people interact?
No, right, right. So with me, as far as my perspective, where usually all professional psychologists, they learn things where they can deal with many different clients, and you do all the research and the readings talking about culture, humility, and some of those things, right? So there's those things in the books.
Hmm.
But one unique thing I think for me was that my military and my veteran status that allowed me to travel and go around many different places in the world, because there's one thing that you can see in a book there's another thing to travel is that some of these different cultures and seeing some of the other different ethnic backgrounds and experience some of these different things so that way I can be humbled, right?
Mhm.
And to know and see some of these things firsthand. So I think that that's one thing that I've been very blessed and fortunate with is that by some of my world travel experiences, I was able to see other kind of cultures and experience other kind of cultures and so therefore, coming in that humble saying, just because I went there doesn't mean that I know everything. Because, just like even me as being a black male, just because identified as a black male person of African descent, doesn't mean I don't know every black experience. All I know is
Exactly.
my experience, and maybe what I'm sharing may resonate with someone else, right?
Mhm.
That other component we're talking about besides that travel is these things about, for me, there were three key components that I always felt that was important for me.
Mhm.
There was things about my veteran status.
Mhm.
There was things about kind of like I'm heavy into martial arts, love martial arts, and about those kind of flexibility in that, and then about spirituality. And within those three, what we find is that I had this common thread that came out, right? This universality about adaptability, flexibility. So I bring those same kind of components into my work with clients about being, things about talking about resiliency
Mhm.
or what have you, or about adapting, because those things before when I was in my mental health kind of journey was I was keeping them separate. So there one moment I put my veteran hat on, my
Yeah.
military hat on. Sometimes I would go put my spiritual hat on. Sometimes I would go out there and put my martial art hat on. I kept them different until one of my supervisors that, was near and dear to my heart that had kind of asked me, say, hey, Abram, I noticed you kind of separate these things out.
Mhm.
What would happen if they was all meshed together? What are the common trends? And it's like,
The light
I seen
bulbs.
that like, yeah, light bulb came on and then I just seen, no, it's almost like that old Voltron for people who know that thing where the robot merges up together, right?
Oh,
And then all of a
Transformer.
sudden it's all me, even adding that mental health, that psychologist component is
Mhm.
that it is all me. So usually when we was asking earlier about how do I see these clients, it's nothing more than me being myself,
Mhm.
right? The same personality that you see me talking here is the same kind of energy that I bring out toward those clients or with my clients, because it's not just me trying to be that authority. It's me talking about collaborating with them, that we collaborate together. It's like they're in the driver's seat and I'm on the side with the map and we just going down the road. Just going, big box kind of perspective.
I love that. I think we need more of that where you're coming from a place of, you know your story better than I do. I'm just here to be, like you said, the map. To just kind of guide you
Right.
and give you a little bit more push to one side to another to help
Yeah,
yourself reach wherever you want to reach to.
yeah, Jamal, you seen that, right? Because a lot of people, they come in and they know got a general sense of where they want to go. It just sometimes I may just bring up a road that they didn't think about, right? Using that analogy, they say, hey, what about that one right there? They want to go down that way. If they don't,
If they
they just
exactly.
right. It's their journey, right?
I definitely understand. What was like, I mean, you mentioned like you traveled a lot.
Mhm.
Did you start doing the mental health work even when you traveled? Is there any like
Um,
particular stories you remember of like visiting a country and you interacted? And what was their
um,
idea about mental health, when you talked to them?
Yes. Well, we'll see like some of the countries that I went into because of, obviously military status. There wasn't stuff I can do much on mental health. However, there was sometimes I was able to implement, like when I was in Afghanistan and I was working with the Afghan soldiers,
Mm,
some of our brothers in arms and kind of stuff like that as they were going out. And talking with some of them and about some of the proud individuals about their identities and about their lives back home, what brought them into the military, for someone who was interpreters, what brought them into interpretation,
mm.
and kind of be interpreters and stuff like that. Because I love like narratives. Yeah, as y'all can tell, I love telling stories,
I
and
love
about some
stories.
of them, about how they intertwine their stories, their identity about this, right? Because that gets to their motivation. So we did some of that stuff when I was in the Republic of Georgia in the former Soviet Union, about talking with some of those soldiers, right? And some of the things they went to. And in some of those situations, I was able to get out to the local populace
Mm,
and seeing some of those life experiences and knowing that some things that I knew within the American society, right? It works here, but over there, right, in some of these other areas, having to be adaptable, like I mentioned about that flexibility,
Mm.
and to be humble, not to come here like I know all the answers, right? But to sit there and listen, right? You learn that skill like as a therapist to listen, right, and to be aware and things like that. Because sometimes we'll notice this. I think I was always good at is sometimes when I went to a foreign country, I may have had a different interpreter with me and things like that. But even though that maybe I didn't fully understand the language at that time, right, or the dialect, is that a lot of times you can read so much about body cues,
Mm.
right, and about their facial expressions and things like that. And sometimes I can just kind of resonate and feel what people were feeling or what they were saying or the messages they were trying to get across. Like we were talking about, like prime example, how sometimes when I was with some of the Afghan soldiers, is that they may have been going through some levels of what I would have called maybe feelings of depression
Mm.
and things like that, right? And maybe because of doing the soldiers, they may not have, because of whatever reason, even knew what about depression or even identified it.
Mm.
But they would come talking about physical ailments, saying,
Oh.
oh, my stomach, my heart, they're talking about physical, they would come see our corpsman, our medical facility and things like that. And so you look, there's no physical thing, but we know it's deeper.
Mm.
But a lot of times, sometimes some people, because of whatever culture, may not be able to express it in that way, right? So that's what sometimes about reading and things like that, where we can kind of learn some of those differences that we can be aware on.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, it's crazy to hear and think about, but it makes sense for somebody who never really think about these pain points as being mental, coming in with actual physical manifestation and talking about it. And
Right.
uh,
And and some of that stuff, right? And we see it and just think about some of these students,
mm,
right? Especially at this university when they're coming to see me. Same thing, that how they are explaining their stuff, right? Because I see a common thing that a lot of times students come in, or maybe they are sent to our office talking about anger,
yeah.
right? And then they come in talking about anger management.
Mm,
They may initially start off talking about anger management, but I see through that.
mm,
Because a lot of times what it is, especially with males, right? People talking about aggressive male and all that, things like that. They may think they're talking about anger, but research kind of shows about that connection between anger and depression.
mm,
What is that? What is that anger? What is that? Because they're irritated. There's some kind of thing about life, some kind of frustration. And the only way they may initially know how to say it right now is through anger,
yeah.
right? Especially kind of with black men, people always talking about angry, angry. They're angry. No, right? When you really look at some of this stuff, what we're talking about is maybe historical trauma that may have went on. There's many things that's going on there. They didn't know that people haven't been allowed. They felt oppressed and
Mm.
be able to even have a voice on these things. So it's coming out that way. So when any student comes in talking about anger, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm
Yeah,
going out.
you
Now, some
know
people,
something else.
yeah, yeah, it's always, so some people may have anger, but there's so much other stuff mixed in with that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the stigmas is we kind of label it as anger for all the emotions that are hidden. And
All right.
I think we're getting a little more questions are coming in. Let me see if
Okay, yes, please.
let's see what this one is saying. How can we best support men and minority mental health for those that are not used to or comfortable talking about it?
Okay, yeah, great question I just sent about how can we support, right? Well, I'm quite sure many of you will have some of these situations. I can tell you from some of the men that will come in my office, right, is that what we notice is that about this part about listening and being non-judgmental,
Hmm.
right? We'll notice in our lives with our families and all that, right? What happens? Somebody says, I have this problem. And what do we commonly go do? We start going into solution mode, right?
Hmm.
Problem solving mode, right? And but sometimes so many people just initially they just want to be heard and say, that's rough.
Yeah.
That sounds rough without any judgments. And then if they seem like they're getting open up, we make an explore saying, hey, I wonder, I wonder if maybe we want to kind of reach out to kind of talk to a professional, but that may come a little bit later on. But that initial thing is we talking about how can we get them help is just where you can sit there and look at them in the eyes, not judgmenting, not trying to problem solve, and just say, I hear you.
Hmm.
You know how much that just kind of helps with people just to have that look and to say, I hear you. I may not, that's what I'm talking about the difference between empathy and sympathy, right?
Hmm.
And then some of that stuff where we just being empathetic, we're trying to connect to that emotion even if we've never had that experience, say, man, that sounds rough. But I just want to be here to be empathetic, to be where you can talk. And through that, we can start establishing that trust, right? Because we know that with males or people in general, when a client comes into me, I'm not going to start trying to just problem solve right in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be this part where we're going to get to know each other, because I feel like that trusting relationship is vitally important before we even get into work. How can I get you to go there to take any paths or any kind of recommendations if you don't trust me?
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, there could be some things when we're talking about mental health, and when I tell people, when they, if you're a person of color and is trying to see a therapist, that you have every right to go out there and ask those questions about with that therapist, about saying, hey, have they worked with people from your population before? How do you feel like some of the things I'm presenting to you? How will my culture, influence about how you work with me? You have every right. And if a person is a therapist or whoever is uncomfortable, kind of addressing those questions, you have every right, because the consultation or what have you, to seek for some other location.
Mm-hmm.
Because this journey is just as much as about you having that trust and building that rapport and connection,
Mm-hmm.
right? Research shows that rapport and connection accounts for a large majority before we even get into the therapeutic work.
No, I totally agree. And I think that's where representation comes in, having somebody that could understand you, especially for me, like therapy was something that I only recently thought about going to or thinking about going to, because that was never
Mhm.
presented to me or thought about, because,
Right.
as a man, you're just like, therapy, I don't do that.
Right,
Uh,
right, Jamal. Yeah, Jamal. You remember how that thing, like you just said, is it wasn't even presented to you.
mm,
We noticed in sometimes when some of y'all was asking about how we can help, having these talks, presenting, just kind of showing, dispelling the stigma, saying that it's okay, right? A lot of times, like you said, people don't even know that it's an option and that it's okay to seek the mental health. That it doesn't mean any kind of sign of weakness,
mhm.
right? Like I tell some of my clients when they first come in, I tell them, you never heard you never heard anybody say that I am a cold.
Mm,
They'll never use that kind of stuff like that, right? I'm a cold, I'm a broken leg,
mm,
and things like that. But you'll quickly hear people say I am. How they kind of put this stuff on their whole being.
mm.
No, you suffer from depression. You may suffer from anxiety. You may suffer from so many different things. And then with a mental health professional, just like with any other kind of health professional, now we start diagnosing and start trying to treat,
Mm.
but it doesn't have to become our being, right? Because then we talk about identity, knowing about our identity, right? Because we know what some of those things is influencing us right in those moments, but it doesn't define who we are. So that thing, like with your foundation, that's why I'm so glad that with the work that y'all are doing out there, is to bringing just awareness.
Yeah.
That I'm hoping that somebody out here right now just notices that, you know what, I can speak to a mental health professional with whatever I may have, and it's okay.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And I think that would be more, I think there's a lot of involvement now with the youth and a lot of these conversations happening. So it makes me happy. Is there other stigmas that you see in the minority health that, that
Right,
you want
right.
to speak about for?
Yeah, so some of these things when we talk about, right, when we're talking about the African American community, right, some stats I had kind of looked up out here, we knew that 10% of African Americans are more likely to experience kind of serious mental health, right?
Hmm.
So we know, like, on some of this stuff when we look, right, there's like about within America, like maybe 13% of the population identifies as African American.
Mhm.
So with that, right, that means about over like 16% could be diagnosable when we start kind of crunching some of those numbers, right? So that kind of calculates out to about 6.8 million people. There's a lot of people dealing with kind of with mental health. So a lot of times with this population, whether it's the African American population or whatever different kind of population where we kind of consider, people of color, is about when we talk about these stigmas, right? What people are saying about this thing about weakness, right? Saying, hey, if we go here, that's one stigma. Some of those other stigmas that may come out is saying that we know that within a lot of our populations, hey, that we may go directly to our spiritual source,
Hmm.
right? Because there's some sides that, yes, we can check into our spirituality, right? That mind, body, soul. There's other kind of parts where it's saying, yes, we can do that spirituality, but then, yes, we can also see the mental health professional too, right? The other stigma is about sometimes about with family, right? About family doesn't have the talks,
Yeah.
right? The elephant in the room. about some of these things and about that modeling behavior. So I think some of this stuff about seeing as representation, seeing about us as two males,
Hmm.
right, from different ethnic backgrounds going out, and just showing that it's okay, that maybe it will resonate with someone saying, I can go out here and it'll be okay. So a lot of times these stigmas comes around lack of knowledge about that this is even an option. I can definitely tell you when I was younger, didn't even cross my mind that, if I was dealing with any kind of mental distress, to see a mental health professional. Just wasn't a conversation. But on that same thing
Hmm.
is that as I was growing up, right, especially within my hometown and all that, then it wasn't a lot of conversation about college. And the main thing was, say, going to sports or going into the military. You can
Hmm.
see where I went out, but I still knew I wanted higher things from there, you know?
I totally agree. I think, um, especially having those conversations at home, it's one of those bigger moves that could happen because you never talk about it at home. I mean, even for me, like it was never.
Right, right.
Um,
Right. There's not conversation because for some of them, maybe they didn't know and they didn't know, so on and so forth. So I love this younger generation. I'm loving what y'all are doing now is saying, no, this awareness. That's one good thing about social media, right?
yeah,
The word is getting out, right? So people can't hide these things and people be locked up, because most people have smartphones or something and they're seeing it, right? And so
definitely.
things like that. So I appreciate what y'all doing on that.
Thank you so much. I think we have more question for the audience.
Okay.
How can I, as a male of color, encourage more help seeking and self-help for male peers and friends without
Okay.
imposing my beliefs or values and considering their own comfort zone? And that was the
Okay.
balance.
Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. So this main thing is, I'll put it like this, right? Because sometimes we try to think about strategies, and I want y'all to do is just do what you do naturally, right? So even when we're talking about within our spirituality, when we're talking about our academics, when we're talking about whatever, what do? We model, right? We model the right behavior. So, or not even say right behavior, but just kind of modeling whatever behavior like this, right? So if we're thinking about kind of mental health, a lot of times is that important thing is maybe if you're talking with others, you
Mm,
may be talking and then say, you know what? I had this one talk about this thing that we having today, or I had this one talk with my therapist and it really helped, or kind of things like that, right?
yeah,
And so when we hear people talking about it and saying that it's okay, it helps, dispel the stigmas. I mean, how is it like how we knew about even going to college? Because we heard somebody else that's
exactly.
talked about it, how they managed, right? How do we know about saying about what our spiritual beliefs? We seen somebody in their actions. How do we know about kind of things with family? We've seen. So the main thing is not overthinking it, just basically just going out here, like they say, letting your light shine, letting you be that model, and then just speaking out about your experience. And that's how I feel like just one of many ways.
Definitely. I think having the conversation is the beginning and making it okay, getting rid of all the stigmas. And I totally agree. Just to shift gears, I
Uh-huh.
know right now, like we're going through a pandemic and mental health is one of the biggest things that everybody, is affected by. Can you talk a little bit about how COVID is affecting mental health and what are
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's been so many talks that I've been giving lately. We know about since we had started doing this stay at home order in California and across the nation, that this is unprecedented since almost like Spanish flu times, since we had these times where it just changed the whole world,
mm,
right? And so with some of these things, as we now have been going, 4 to 5 months of these things and about right. You think about how much time has passed
yeah,
and about how our whole reality about how we interact with people, how we socialize, how we study, how we do our practice with our spirituality, how we communicate. Yeah, everything has changed. And that's why I was talking about it earlier about that adaptability and that flexibility about knowing about things I have in my control, things that are not within my control. And for those things that are within my control, seeing even if they're small little steps about changing, to realize that one thing I can do is about changing about my being, knowing that the COVID and the thoughts about COVID makes me stressed, right?
yeah,
Or makes me kind of have low energy or whatever things like that. But to realize that that's okay, right? And to be able to talk with others about it and to be able to acknowledge it, right? And to say, hey, this may be going on, right? But what I can do is I still can watch what I eat. I still could try to exercise. I could still journal, right? Knowing about how some of these things, how COVID works in is how we talk about stress,
Mm,
distress, and how we get into anxiety, trauma, or what have you, right? So we know a lot of times stress is like maybe kind of more focused in on a key element, something that's kind of causing that stress,
mm,
and the physiologicals. When we get into distress, when there's things, just so much stuff going on, we seem like we don't have a clear picture. Some of that leads to generalized anxiety because we feel like it's coming from many different places, right? And then whatever we see out can then bring on about kind of trauma. So with some of these things, we know that with a lot of stuff that we see on social media, some things we see on news and things about COVID and all, it can make it a very scary place. When we see about the peaceful protests and all this stuff, right? And all the things, and all the stuff we see on TV, it can keep, our like sympathetic nervous system. We get in that fight and flight all the time.
exactly.
So knowing how it's affecting our bodies, and since we know that, we also know that by exercise, by eating, by watching our sleep, by being mindful of our emotional processing,
Mm,
that's one thing that we can have in our control. So when we talk about this COVID, I know it's kind of cliche. I know these sites are saying it,
mm,
right? Why some people feel like it's maybe not working because it's very, any one of us can learn the information,
mm.
but sometimes trusting to do it is so hard. That's the
Yeah,
hard part, the
yeah.
doing. Yeah, right?
Mm.
Yeah, because
Taking the
I
effort.
can go ahead and quote, I can go ahead and quote stats all day and all that, but that's one thing. But about can we actually do it? Somebody telling you about breathing, to eat right and all that. What happens when we actually put a effort to actually do?
Definitely. Are there like any like platforms or apps or anything like that you would recommend for people to use
Okay,
just
yes, yeah,
to get involved in the action part? Because I know it's hard and something to keep them motivated.
yes, definitely. Two apps I want to put to them, and I know Jamal that you can put on the site for them later on, or
Yeah,
they can reach out to you.
interesting.
And some of y'all may can look at it now, and excuse the Georgia accent, but I'm saying like COVID coach,
Mm,
right? COACH, right? And if somebody wanted to type that COVID coach, if you look up that app on your smartphone, right, is that with that COVID coach, it will go and it has many, thank you, Chris. It has many different resources on there
mm,
about mindfulness, about eating, about sleeping, right? About psychoeducation in relation to some of these things. That's a very good app that was made that you can use to kind of monitor like one-stop shopping. Another app that is very good is called the Virtual Hope Box.
okay.
Virtual Hope Box, right? So with that Virtual Hope Box, one specific thing I like in that one is that it has this. Thank you, Chris. It has this one particular component that talks about a coping,
Mm,
like coping action plan. So it will tell you where you can make up a plan saying, "Hey, this is my stressor. This is what I normally do to kind of cope, and now I track it." Because a lot of stuff comes about that emotional awareness about what are the triggers. Is it because I've been in this house for long periods of time
yeah.
that there may be certain things about certain areas in the house I have to be careful on about triggers? There's certain things about who I'm hanging around within the
Mm,
house or who I talk to or what I look at on media to mitigate, to make a coping plan to know that when these danger zones come in that we can kind of back away. So those are two of the apps that I would say, and you'll be surprised too with that NAMI, NAMI, on their website. And I'm quite sure on your foundation, they got some other kind of resources
yeah.
that we look at some of those different things for students that are CSUN. If you look at our university counseling page, we have so many different resources that you can look into, right? As far as like one-stop shopping for how to deal with this, but definitely within those two apps, they got resource sections where you can look at. So that way, I feel like if all else, those two are very good kind of things that you can start off with on your journey.
I think those are really good recommendations, and the very I like about them is very simple to do. It's download the app and kind of maneuver to it. Um,
Exactly. In this day and age, right?
Everything is on
Apps,
your
you
phone.
got your phone.
Yeah, exactly. With that being said, I know our time is a little bit up. If you have
Hmm.
any closing remarks you want to leave to our
Oh,
audience
well,
before we close it.
Oh yes, so like I said, definitely. Thank you for having me
Of
on
course.
today. It was a great talk as we are talking on these things. I know that a lot of people that are coming here, they come to look at Instagram Live for their own many different reasons, right?
Mm.
But with many of these things, is just knowing about that. We know it's rough right now. It is, and then definitely if you feel like you want to seek help, you can look at Psychology Today, look up find a therapist. You can Google that Psychology Today, find a therapist, and they got a little website easily to find someone. You could always hit me up in the DMs if you like. I'm trying to look for a consult,
Yeah.
something like that. Trying to look some additional guidance about how to find someone. Right, as we know, the stuff that we do in here between our talk is not therapy and things like that.
Mm.
Stuff like that. They can seek a mental health provider. But to say on here is that we definitely, I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate for everyone who's out here that, that just to have the conversation, that thing about saying, hey, I just had an interesting IG Live and they brought up these different topics, right? About trauma, about anxiety, about depression, and just knowing, saying that, hey, to validate that we know that this pandemic is going on, that it's affecting these different communities, but yes, we can reach out and, support each other to get help because we won't be able to do this alone. I can't do this alone. I need y'all help to spread that word. So definitely thank you.
Yeah, we were definitely together. Thank you so much. Last thing before I leave you, I know
Mhm.
audience really love the analogies that you've been using. Is there
Oh,
one last analogy you want to say for?
okay, okay. You want me to do the analogy? Hold on. Let me pull up my key, right? So okay, so yes, I know people always ask me about this scene like this one, right? So a lot of times, most of y'all, everybody, they can see this key, right? And a lot of times when I'm with my clients, before they leave out with me, I have a bunch of keys similar to this one just piled up on my one of my desks. And they see it, but a lot of times I don't bring it up there close to the end and I ask them to go and pick up one of those keys, right? And the keys I have in my office have many different designs on them, right? Small, big, and all these different kind of things. So a lot of times, what I after they choose a key, I tell them that a lot as they're transversing in life, right? They may initially notice that this key represents their emotion, right? Their emotional door, or
Mhm.
like I call that gate, right? So we have our gate, right, with our emotions behind this magical door or a gate or what have you. And sometimes we forget about that with our key is that we are in control of our key,
Mhm.
but a lot of times we may give it to others,
Mhm.
right? And then they are in control of our emotion, in control of our reactions. We may not even notice this, that sometimes when we're getting angry at society, we're getting angry at family members, and some of this stuff. What we're forgetting is that I am the controller, I'm the gatekeeper of my own emotion. But sometimes when we do some of these things and what our emotional trials, right? It may not be an individual, it could be an incident or whatever. We give that our emotional regulation or our emotions to that thing. So sometimes what we need to do is we need to gain our key back.
Definitely.
So a lot of times I give them this key just to remind them, saying, hey, sometimes you need to look and say, who has your emotional key right now?
Mhm.
Do you have your key? Are you in control of your emotions? And I'm not saying that the bottle up emotion. I'm just saying to be able to know that these are my emotions and it's okay. Or have we given our emotional happiness and what have you to others? So
Definitely.
we talk about analogies, right? I know usually I go on a more longer wind thing, but I know we was running out of time. They're just kind of saying, hey, always remember who has your key.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. And thank you for all our viewers for tuning in. We will repost this video and we'll share it on both platforms. But thank you, Dr. Milton, and I hope we could have more
Yeah.
conversations like that, like this later
Well,
on.
definitely, yeah, Jamal, thank you very much. And I know, like, saying we're getting ready to start kind of Eid for the night, so I welcome for everyone. Hey, have a blessed one, and definitely thank y'all
Thank
again.
you so much. You have a wonderful day.
All right,
Bye.
yeah, you too. Now, see you later, bye.